Hello, adventurers of Zulus. Welcome to the Zulus D&D live stream, where we talk about all the delightful D&D things that you could want in your life. Well, let's tabletop pen and paper RPGs. We're here to help learn you all the fun stuff you can about D&D. The lovely banging in the background. Which I'm excited for. I think next week we're going to be coming from underneath a gym, so there may be some noises. Hopefully our mics are well focused.
Exactly.
Goodness gracious. Anyway, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about world building. But before we get to world building, segueing from Curse of Strahd, which is a delightful world, I think we probably should touch on it just a little bit. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? What do we do? I'm Rob. Alex, you're over here today. Go ahead and give us a wave,
so
and then.
So you're right there.
Other side.
Oh, other side.
Yeah,
you got it.
You're
All
off,
right, well,
I'm off
hello.
your left shoulder, and then Jason, go ahead and give us a wave.
Oh, all right,
So we are the DMs for Young Adventures here at Zulu's Board Game Cafe. We do D&D adventures for kids. So it's we'll have one, two. I think I had a group that was meeting 5 times a week at one point when the pandemic first started. We've since brought it back a little bit because school is definitely a thing. But in our working that we've done over the last amount of time means nothing anymore. In our last amount of time, there's a lot of experience that we've gained, and we want to share that with you, especially if you have questions about D&D.
And don't forget, we also do. We're not just DMs for young children. We are also DMs for adults as well.
Sorry,
we do branch out.
My mustache. Yeah. So I think a couple. We have some adult campaigns, and then we also like to talk about some of the other games. Cyberpunk Red's core book comes out soon. What is the Jason? Do you know the release date for Cyberpunk Red?
Oh, I forget what that one is. It's shifted like the actual game a number of times.
Yep.
So
yeah,
and yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I have to double check that one.
Also, if we're very very lucky, what's the name of the writer? I just read his name. I'm so bad. He's in here on a semi-regular basis.
I am willing when that releases. Hold on. Go ahead and.
Yeah. So my hope is if he would be interested, we would love to have him come in and talk about his game. I think that would be amazing. You guys are amazing. I've enjoyed chatting with people online so far. So I figure we'll try to bring you some fun new stuff. Also, if there's any games or subjects that you would like us to cover, feel free to make a post on the Facebook. We have a Discord that you can hop on. If you go to zulusgames.com, go to community. In there, it will have the link for the Discord. Feel free to give us a chat. We're always watching that. We're always keeping an eye out.
Or if you want to contact us directly, you can also email us at zulusdnd@gmail.com. I'm going to send a little bit of it into the Twitch chat just in case.
Yeah. So yeah, I suppose that's a delightful chunk of preamble. Jason, do we have word on the release date and name?
The stuff I just looked up said the 19th, but that would be today.
It's out today.
We do not have copies of it, so.
Shoot.
Yeah.
We do have the beginner box though, which is exciting. So
Thank
if
goodness.
you want like to sort of dip your toe in, so to speak, beforehand.
Sorry. I saw the date wrong. It's November 19th. That would be one.
Okay. So we've got a month from today. It'll be coming out.
Originally October 19th.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Course.
So that'll give us some time to try and convince. I think his last name is Mr. Pondsmith.
Yes. Paul Smith.
Give us some time to convince Pondsmith to come on and hang out and chat with us. But that's not what we're here for today. We're here to talk about world building. Big question. First question. What is world building? Putting you on the spot, Jason, go. Tell me about world building.
World building always depends on the game. It ranges from creating a city that is a setting. It's usually setting creation. So it's creating the place where the adventures will be. That can be it can be the house that they're going to be, the haunted house they're going to be going to, and that's one shot, and that's all you need to deal with. I mean, you usually have to do a little more than that. Because you need backstory to the house, why it's haunted. But it can also be a whole world as world building. So you could be creating the entirety of the gods, the the cosmic order, and just the governments and the physical land masses that are there. It can be daunting, but I recommend it can be pretty vague too. You don't have to know everything at first because they're not going to be in every corner of the world in the beginning, hopefully,
Yeah.
unless you're doing something odd. Yeah, because it can even
Alex,
range multiple dimensions. D&D is huge. When you look at, like, if you like world building, it's got planes of existence, and it's got its own subworlds. You can go to Theros. You can there's a lot of stuff, and you know and once again, you can also just use other aspects of world. Yeah, Theros right there. But yeah, that would be my take on world building's kind of, in a way, session zero for the DM. It's
session
something that
pre-zero.
you do on your own. So it's not you shouldn't not include your players in the idea of world building, because they might, if they will help shape it with their session zero, or just talking about their characters. When they're related to a duke, that duke suddenly becomes a part of that world.
And I just saw in the comment, or in the chat, there's a shout out to a character that is really helping at least me develop a world, the Dogson and the Dogson family. Uh, so that we'll get to that when we get to a little bit more, a little later.
So you mentioned I think the sort of pre-existing worlds versus making worlds. So, and because so I showed off the books for Eberron, Theros, and then the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. So in 5th edition D&D, the game is for the most part set in the player's handbook is set in the Forgotten Realms. So all the information that they have about that is Forgotten Realms based. In previous editions, it was set in other settings, which I found very fascinating. The deities that they showed in 3rd edition were not the ones that sort of we know now. So that was an interesting sort of transition. But yeah, so this I think was a very fascinating thing, because I think for some people the idea of well, you're just in the world, you're in the fantasy world, but there's a lot of details and sort of subtle nuances that can get involved as far as world building goes. Now, Jason, for the most part, do you create your own worlds, or do you use pre-existing worlds?
I create my own. I tend to really focus. I've got like my main, like, fantasy world. Although, I mean, when I started out, I would use the 2nd edition was primarily, that's where I really started playing, and it was world neutral. It was pretty much like, you create the gods, you create everything. And so that's kind of where, like most DMs, you're taking stuff that you've always played with before. So I've always had that impulse. Fantasy D&D to me was always creating your own world. They had their own worlds. You could play in Dragonlance, you could play in Dark Sun, you could do all those other things. But the base player's handbook had that, and players, Dungeon Master's Monsters Manual was pretty generic. But yeah, this is more, the 5th edition is way more, it's way more, it is completely Forgotten Realms for the most part. But even in that book, if you look in the back, like the pantheons of gods, they say pick your own, and they have the Norse gods, and they have a lot of other gods, not just the Forgotten Realms ones. In fact, the bit about the Forgotten Realms gods is pretty spotty, but like all of the books from there on out, like Bolos and so on, are all very much Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
So.
And Alex, for your experience so far, have you tended towards using published worlds, or do you use homebrew worlds?
So I use more homebrew worlds, but my story's a little bit kind of interesting. So the shout out to Jason. He's actually got this whole developed world, and he has shared a lot of ideas with me about his world. So I kind of take bits and pieces that I want, and then also twist them. So like, there's 2 cities that we have names in common. One of them is Miros, and the other is Kustos. His version of Miros is very uppity, and, like, I'm assuming it's pretty righteous, kind of like Metropolis, sort of, in comic books. Whereas mine has like 2 different rings. The outer ring is just this super dirt poor, really cruddy, poorly run. There's like the mafia that's everywhere, kind of in charge, and then there's the inner ring, where the Fruit Loop Dingus King, as some kids have actually called him, where he lives, and there's all the richest of the rich people in the entire realm, and they're just hanging out there, being super snobby about, oh, you're from the outer ring, and they wave their
Classic,
hands in.
classic class struggle. Gosh,
Exactly.
the word class is used far too much in D&D. Anyway, please continue.
And then like the other city, Kustos is kind of like in Jason's world. Sorry, sorry,
Oh,
Jason,
that's
for
fine.
stealing your stuff.
Oh.
Um, but in Jason's world, his is more like Gotham City, or his version of Kustos is Gotham City, whereas mine is more like a small farmer town. And
Yeah,
it,
that's my simplified like Metropolis Gotham City for that like that feel. But like in mine, he's saying my Custo, my Miros, which is the capital city of the kingdom, it is run by wizards and it's all magic. So there's like everything is pristine and perfect on the surface. So you end up with like garbage that picks itself up off the streets because there are unseen servants everywhere and things like that. Um, but and then the Custos is a darker place because on the other side it's next to a great wall where there's the undead are kept at bay by just a large wall, and any punishment is threatened with a throw over the wall, you know. And so and but there's lots of thieves guilds and stuff in that area, so hence the kind of more grungy place than Miros.
I like it.
But yeah, sorry.
So it's funny because the two of you have done a lot of sort of world building just completely by yourself, whereas I, for the most part, am setting a lot of my games in Faerun, Eberron, and Theros. And the Eberron and Theros are actually relatively new to me, and it's presented a variety of interesting sort of challenges that I'll get into later. But my first kind of question for you guys is so. Personally, the reason I think that I a lot of times will use the published books is because a lot of me is I play by the seat of my pants. So I will go into most of my sessions with really no idea what's about to happen. And as things start happening, I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and I'll sort of react to what the players are doing. Um, so sort of having the structure of the world beforehand is very helpful for me because then I don't have to worry about what's the pantheon, that sort of thing. If someone asks me like, hey, I want to worship a god, what gods are there? I don't have to be like, well, what gods are there? Because I certainly don't have the foreknowledge to be able to do that. And I can read a little bit about the gods. So tell me a little bit about how you have developed pantheons. Sorry, gods keep coming up a lot, I think, because those are the sort of most ubiquitous. So you could geographically be in a very small spot, but the pantheon of the world, I think, is a very important thing. It's very much sort of built into the culture.
I think it is too, in the sense that like a lot of times you're gonna need a creation myth for the world, and maybe not the main one, but like in mine, I basically kind of went off of like a Greek mythology where you have the Titans and the
Yeah.
young gods dethrone the Titans, the power of the gods. There's a gods war, and then these are the new gods, and the Titans all died, and there's the current gods. Not Titans, they're just the previous gods, the parents of the gods. Some of them may still be around, acting as like MacGuffins. You could wake them up or something.
Yeah.
But the thing I did with that was that there was a number of these upstart gods. They still pop up if enough people can believe in an idea. Also, there are smaller gods, so like that way I can have players have their own gods that they come up with. They're not just these main bigger gods. And those gods will be looking to dethrone the current gods. So there's a constant like war of the gods that's always happening. That's my thought on like how I did it in mine, but it was because I came up with that creation myth and the creation of the world. Every group argues about it. The dwarves say that dwarves made the world. That kind of thing. It's just obviously it works, doesn't it? But and elves are just like, oh, we've always been here. It doesn't matter. We always will be here. That kind of thing. You can and they do have creation myths, but they're not going to tell you you're not an elf. That's at least my approach to those kind of things. I kind of like in my head have like a little and written down, of course, what the different god, the way the gods work. The other big inspiration I have is the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman and Neil Gaiman in general. In it, he has the Endless family, who everyone perceives the gods differently. So are these of the endless, like Dream. There's times in the comic where the cat is talking about this concept of Dream, and Dream normally is this white skinned, black haired person. Um, and with black eyes, and to the cat, when they tell a story about him, it's a black cat. And in different characters and different, like, because this was set in the DC universe, like the Martian Manhunter season was a flaming Martian skull because that was the god on Mars, dreams. And so they're the same concepts but worshipped in different ways. So that made it easier because I kind of, it's just in my particular thing, I don't use a lot of, I don't like having to have different gods for every race. It makes them a little more united.
Yeah, so it's basically the same gods, just seen through the different lenses of the different
And
things.
even, yeah, and they can actually end up becoming their own ideas. Therefore, it's weird, but yeah, I don't go into the metaphysics of it with kids games because it's a bit much.
Yeah,
Although older kids have delved into it a bit and find it fascinating, so then
yeah,
they're trying to figure it out.
yeah. And I feel like this is an important piece of context. How long have you been working on this world? How long has this world existed?
For me, oh gosh, let's see, second edition. So the base ideas like would have been like probably when I was in high school. So we're looking at like 92. It's been around for a long time. Um,
That's I can do math.
That's like
22 years.
20.
yeah, and then like mainly
Wow.
I got more use out of it in college. I did a lot of folklore research, and so a lot of my stuff is pulled from folklore and mythology.
Okay.
So I like using like, I have a lot of different sub races than normally as occur in D&D. Let's see, I don't use these with in most of the kids games, but like I have Metahune, which are like Pacific Island dwarves from Pacific Island myths and stuff. But they're specific, and but it's in an adventure that's taking place in island type things. You'll run into those.
Yeah.
Although we have a question here, I wanted to point out.
Oh yeah,
Shoot
Uh,
absolutely.
the question.
Pet peeve of mine, so feel free to ignore this. What are your thoughts on atheism in D&D, where gods, magic, and good and evil are concrete, provable things? So there is a game, I've mentioned it before, called Torque, and it's a weird one that has a fantasy aspect in it. There's a fantasy world, and the gods have created everything. Everybody knows the gods exist, but there are specific dwarves that turn their backs on the gods, not because they don't think they exist, but thinks that they won't do anything for me anyways, and so they can cause faith to not work.
That's
Because it's like,
hilarious.
and so like they get like kind of a bonus to resist faith. And I kind of like that idea of atheism, where you cannot say it doesn't exist unless like you had somehow they were that you could, maybe a spell could make it happen where they cannot perceive it,
Yeah.
or some kind of curse.
I mean, I could definitely see there being like, I mean, sure, there's the influence of the gods in a lot of these fantasy realms, but I could definitely see there being like a location, a person, a group of people, even a whole like country or city that's like we haven't had direct contact with any of these deities. Like I don't. There's not been a time where the gods have come down and done anything. So are we sure that they're actually there and not just conceptual sort of thing? And then people will of course be like, oh well, the clerics they get their spells. I'm like, yeah, but they're conceptual anyway. And I think more so now with fifth edition clerics, where it's less of a specific sort of thing that falls under a god, but rather a sort of greater concept that's giving them the energy. So I think that could be a fascinating thing to explore, and something I think that would you'd want to really think about in your world is atheism. Oh, that
An
is
atheist
atheism.
cleric.
Well, no, I mean, because it could be. It's not that he believes in gods, rather that he believes in a sort of like the greater
In, like, an
concept and
ideal.
getting the magic from it. Yeah. So I think that could be really interesting, and I think that really sort of speaks to the question of how sort of interactive are the deities in the world. I know that in Forgotten Realms they have the Time of Troubles, where the gods literally were like in the world, stomping around doing things. But I could even see someone making a very compelling argument to be like, well, they were just really powerful wizards. Like, have you seen what wizards can do? They literally have a spell called Wish, where they just do anything.
And with the existence of sorcerers, you could have wizards who say, yeah. Those clerics, they're just sorcerers who think there are gods.
Oh, that would be hilarious and delightful. Like a
Yeah,
like
I could see a quirky wizard being like, puffing on his pipe, going, "You see, he's just using his own powers.
he's just
There
a
is no
sorcerer.
God."
Oh man, no. See, and I would love that as a concept for oh man, I want to play the campaign where you're playing the classic fantasy realm. You're told all the stuff, and then one day in your little village, the god comes down to you so let's say you're a paladin of Lathander. Lathander every morning comes to you, says, "Hey, how's it going?" And one day Lathander's a little sad, and you're like, "Lathander, what's up, bud?" And he's like, "Everyone's lost faith. No one believes in me anymore. Um, you know what? I need you to go on a crusade. Bring back my words into. Oh, we've touched on a bad topic there. Anyway, but that could be a very fascinating thing of you like being a paladin, being a cleric, or even a druid, and like proselytizing this idea like these are gods. Like I literally have magic from them. Look at my magic, and having groups of people just being like, "You're full of bees. You're just a sorcerer. Get out of here." I mean, I think that though definitely bumps against that whole escapism thing, and I think it would really depend on what you're playing the game for. If you're wanting to just live in a world where there is nicely defined, like, no, they're gods and we can point to them, they're right there.
Yeah, I just had coffee with them last week.
Exactly.
It was totally fine.
So I think if that's, but at the same time, it could be fascinating, sort of like to take that sort of trope and turn it on its head. Which I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times when it comes to sort of world building or that sort of thing, because even in the published adventures, there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of big open spaces that you can just sort of put whatever in. I a lot of times will turn to tropes, but then also I really like to take tropes and turn them on their head. So, long-winded way of saying I think atheism in a game would be fascinating. But also, again, it comes back to that session 0. You got to make sure your group is ready to dive down that particular rabbit hole. I think. That's just me.
You could also easily have like a barbarian doing the classic like Conan thing of I destroy anything magical to I destroy anything divine because the gods forsook my.
See, but that's not atheism because he still believes in the gods. He just believes that they're
yeah, I guess
jerks.
It's a form. Yeah, or thinking that they're delusional, like crazy people.
Yeah, I did always love that the line in Conan where he's like, "Come, listen to me. I will do all these things for you, and if not, to heck with you." Just a very barbarian way of worshiping your deity of war, where it's just like, I'm gonna win with your help, of course, because you're the god of war, and if you forsake me, then I'm still gonna win because I don't care about your face.
I'm going to destroy you, no matter what.
Yeah. And I do love that in 5th edition, we're off topic by a lot, but I love in 5th edition that they've gone back to that sort of bare-chested barbarians, where they go into battle, be like, I don't need armor because it slows me down. Because before, like, it was detrimental to wear armor because you lost a lot of your abilities. Now it's like, no, you're so muscular, things glance off you because you don't care. You're a buff dude. Get after it. Put your little fur banana hammock on and get after it. Yeah. So...
Sweet. Cool.
Yeah. So world building I find very, very fascinating. So from a macro scale, we're talking countries, we're talking deities. From a micro scale, I don't know. So do you have Jason in your world specific cities, names, and sort of cultures? Like how detailed are you on your map? Do you have a map? I guess.
Yes, I do have a map. I have a drawn map that I've been slowly updating, but I'm also so in terms of macro scale, I actually probably share it in a minute, but I have been working on like one of the groups is playing a group of sailors, so they're exploring the sea, and they've kind of gotten lost and are in the middle of an archipelago or a bunch of islands, and it's referred to as the Islands of Terror, and so there's a bunch of like things there that you shouldn't encounter. So I've done up a map that has like what they've seen and also places they can go. You're hard to hear me? All right.
I turned up your guys' volume, so hopefully that'll be easier.
Okay. Anyways, so yes, so I have like this map of this archipelago that this group of islands that they can go and see, and like I know what's there, and so but I didn't have it. I had like here be monsters area on my world map. Basically it's a world map with a lot of, I know the basic culture. I don't go drill down into it until I need to. I know if I want to set an empire or a group there or a country, I might have the the outline of them. But until the players go there, it's not really set in stone. So I can kind of, and or an NPC from there shows up is another example. But I do have things. Oh, could still be up. All right. Anyways, so there's a lot of that I do, but I have a drawn map, and for my current game, their whole thing is taking place in a former prison colony, and I've done up a map that has, I did a physical map, as well as I've been converting it into the digital thing, so that way it's easier for me to change it as they go through and show their roots on it, and where they know that NPCs. It's kind of I think I mentioned before, but it's kind of a battle royale type situation where they're all trying to be the last ones alive in a certain environment. So there's definitely needed to be a map and where things could be like caches of weapons and stuff. So
I like it. So
yeah, exactly.
It's funny you mentioned. So how do you pronounce the group of islands again?
Archipelago, or you can actually that one.
I always liked archipelago, but that's again, I don't know how to pronounce words. I'm bad at it. So
it's
sorry.
It's also just probably like based off of the world. In some worlds, it could be archipelago. In other worlds, it could be archipelago.
Yeah.
It's like totally up for whatever.
Yeah, it's also there's a British and otherwise pronunciation too, so I can fall into that one.
So it's funny that you mentioned the islands thing. So in the Sword Coast Guide, they have this awesome island chain called what is the name of this place? The Moonshae Isles. So I was reading a little bit about these, and I love that basically every paragraph about the islands are kind of almost are like story hooks. So the largest and most populous island of the Moonshae Isles it's not Alderaan.
Wait, we're in Star Wars now?
Yeah, right.
When did this happen?
So the stronghold of Kaldir overlooks the bay south of. Oh my gosh, there's so many names in here. The Fairheight Mountains to the northern edge of the Dalaran Forest. Wow. So actually, I like the written stuff mostly because I am terrible at coming up with names. It's like, here are these names of these things. And then it goes on to mention the forest is a perilous place filled with goblins, wargs, and their ilk. The deeper one goes, the more otherworldly the woods become, with the fey creatures leading travelers astray or to their doom. Even the High King's rangers walk the forest with care. I love that little. It's just a single paragraph describing one part of the island. And it sounds in many ways like what you've done so far with your islands, which is it's a very vague paragraph. Like, there's an island, there's goblins in their ilk or something, and there's some fae, and this sometimes leads you to your doom. And then very specific names.
Specific names, general ideas.
Right. So I think what it kind of comes down to with world building, like on the kind of the macro scale, excuse me, is that having kind of a rough idea of what's happening in each of those places is very helpful as a DM to kind of know like where to go. I also like that this book, your players could have read through this book and be very familiar with it, and then that could kind of be kind of your baseline for this is what people have heard of the world and what they sort of know of it. But then you as a DM can really sort of deep dive and get into the meat of what that actually means. So it sounds like in many ways, if going with the published thing versus writing your own, it really depends on whether or not you want to have that creative freedom to just be like, these are my spoopy islands. What were they called again?
Isles of Terror?
Isles of Terror.
I'd have to actually. I need to double check my notes because it's in French because I was just using French as the language of the land because just because it's much more interesting in French. But I forget what I called it.
I do that a lot of times with like spells or like keywords for stuff. I'll be like, translate English to Latin.
Yeah, and like, then there you go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like having that kind of for me personally, being someone who ends up using a lot of times the books, one of the things I kind of like about it is that I have that sort of baseline. But I'm much more of a by the seat of my pants kind of DM, where a lot of times I'm getting my sort of cues and information from my players, and in the case that they don't, to have like a starting point, I like to have those sort of paragraphs to be like, this is the general sort of layout. But at the same time, the pitfall of that is A, you have to read it, and B, you can't really have the same level of freedom. I mean, sure, you could say that either that's information from the past, or it's misinformation that's been given. But your players will come into every location with a certain expectation, provided they've read the book before. Which I've been running into that with Eberron a lot recently, because Eberron has such a very rich culture to it, and there are a lot more things that are sort of ubiquitous. Like, there is only one house of half-elves that have the dragon mark of the storm that are the pilots of the airships. Oh, by the way, there's airships, and those are run by elementals who are controlled. But there's a lot of like little intricacies that in the spur of the moment you don't necessarily know. And what's fascinating is one of my players knows Eberron very well. Like, I've discovered a lot of times kids will get a hold of books and they'll just sort of read through them from cover to cover because they have not much else to do, I guess.
Right. I used to do that when I was a kid, and there was the Practical Guide to Monsters series. Those were super fun to read. Just be like, yep, nope, that's cool.
Yeah. Which, again, double-edged sword. You can definitely run into situations where you're like, there's this monster, and the kids will tell you, well, we've done 37 points of damage to it so far, and it has 47 hit points, so all we have to do is 10 more points of damage to it. And I'm just like, why are you at it?
Why are you just playing a numbers game? What the heck?
We're doing a role-playing game, guys. Gosh. But again, it can also be one of those things where I can describe a couple of things of a monster. They can then figure out which they then feel good about. And then they can be like, oh, no, that's like a CR7, and we're 5th level characters. We've got to be careful. So I think it's knowing that group and sort of using it with it.
Yeah. Well, I know. Go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking, you can also use that to your advantage, which is like where I use the gas spore, one of my favorite little annoyances, which is the little thing that floats but looks like a beholder. And so what it wants to do is you attack it, and then it explodes in a cloud of spores, which then poisons anybody unless they have a really high constitution. And actually you have 24 hours to live approximately. So it creates, especially in lower level characters, it creates first they freak out, but then they're like, oh no, we have to find a cure. Yeah. And so that create a whole adventure, but it does stop a little bit finding the creatures that do that. There's a few, because I know in basic edition and second edition there was a lot of that, like players would figure that out, so they came up with all these like look-alike creatures, which is you had a lot of undead versions of the same thing, undead treants and things like that, just to be like, oh, I know what that is. Oh no, you don't. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And that can be kind of interesting, bringing it back to world building. Having your monster, making your own world gives you that freedom to sort of like, say, well, in this particular section, you've got undead versions of all of the things. Or maybe there's some sort of magical energy that's slowly mutating creatures to make them either, particularly dangerous, particularly weak. You can play around with that sort of thing. Saying something else?
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say that I'm kind of realizing I've got a little bit of a mix between both of you, where there is a little bit of I fly by the seat of my pants, but I also am like, I have an idea of a world that I want. And part of the fun that's in the run by the fly of your pants, or seat of your pants, fly of your pants, whatever the
pantsing.
All right. So whenever I'm pantsing around, it's actually kind of fun, because there's like some kids, or there's some groups where they're just like, well, what do you need? I'm like, whatever, you can pick what. And then one person, Mr. Dogson, that we've seen in the chat way ago, it was like, well, I want to revere the Dog Queen. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's get weird. And so sometimes he's like, I'm going to pray to the Dog Queen to see if I can get any help. And I'm like, okay, great. We see this vision of the dog versus the squirrel. And so that's kind of a fun concept to be running through. Just like, oh yeah, so you are a character, but you are a follower of a certain god.
And then you're just watching this god doing god things, trying to get like some information, but you're just watching.
So it's funny that you mentioned the dog god. I had a campaign that I was running where the whole idea was I had them build their characters, and then I was like, cool, how did your character die, and why were they buried in a hero's tomb? Which that went in a variety of interesting directions. There was a kobold that had just happened to be killed by the paladin guarding the hero's tomb and just sort of shoved in the corner. So when he was resurrected, because of course they were resurrected, he was like, I have to follow the Lathander thing came up because he worships the sun. It's just really funny because he has disadvantage while in the sun. It's a delightful dichotomy. But one of the characters was a barbarian that worshipped a dog spirit,
Yep.
like the spirit of the wolf, which is very fascinating. And I sort of leaned into it because the whole idea was each of the individual players had had a specific sort of deity that they was sort of helping them along. They gave him a gift, all this stuff. But it was interesting because I introduced this sort of wolf deity very sort of handedly, but I'm set in, this is Faerun, and there is no dog god that I know of. But it was very interesting.
I actually did a little bit of. So her name is Sirius, the Dog Queen. It was in some it was in a very obscure spot on the internet that I'm like, okay, this sounds pretty D&D, so I'm gonna definitely keep up with this Sirius, the Dog Queen. And so it's just kind of stumbled into this campaign, or this whole idea of I pray to the Dog Queen, and he traveled through a whole dungeon, and he was given a gift by the Dog Queen, which was a spiky collar.
Well, yeah.
And he was able to transform into a direwolf, and that direwolf is called the Blessing of Sirius.
I like it.
And so it just leads to a whole bunch of fun stuff that, and it's always fun to build a world with the players too. So the players, you have an idea, but if the players have a cool idea to add onto it, I'm like, yeah, that works. Yeah. I like that.
Well, and that's what I find so very, very fascinating about the two different ways of world building. So you have your sort of your homebrew world, where you have a lot of that sort of lateral ability to be able to be like, I'm gonna, the players are building we're making the Dog Queen god, which you can't really do in a pre-published adventure, but the players have the ability to kind of more immerse themselves in the world with one of the published adventures, because they can have the book and read through it and know information about it. So going back to the Eberron campaign, the one of the players, he was the one that knew the fact that it was the half elves that ran the house that flew the airships. His character is from a specific house as well. He's one of the Dwarven house, the Dragon Mark of Warding, I want to say. So I find that very kind of interesting, that the dichotomy between the two, where, in Forgotten Realms, in Eberron, you don't have necessarily the same sort of ability to sort of make things up as you would in a homebrew. But yeah. With the exception, I think, of Theros. Theros is delightful because it literally says that the distance between locations will change. It sort of depends. In the book, it's sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes 30 days.
Are you taking the road, or are you just walking along?
Even if you're on the road, literally two groups of people could set off on the road. One leaves a day before the other one. The one that left a day early can arrive there in 5 days, where the one that came behind them will arrive in 30 days, and they did not, either of them stop and did not change pace. They went going at the same pace. But Theros is also very much based in the whole sort of Greek epic style, where so much of the world itself is sort of built on that idea of, the gods are getting involved. We're going back to the deities. It's that very Greek style of things where they'll gift you these epic tools to go on epic adventures, and which I find very fascinating.
Well, yeah, definitely one way that is a solid concept of world building is talking about the gods and just if there's any sort of religions. So that's kind of how we keep on tying back into, what are the gods of this world? There's a Dog Queen. Okay, cool, that's dope.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because it's the kind of universal thing. Most other things are sort of geographically limited, um, and that's I think what makes Eberron so very fascinating is because the houses are across the entire place. So it's not like one country has these things. I mean, it is obviously one country has these things, but then also you'll find the different houses, you'll find the different technologies. So yeah, that's that I find. Yeah, the deities are definitely like I think kind of a binding glue, so to speak. Um,
Yeah. I know one fun thing to talk about is sometimes the cities itself. I know that we were just talking about cities a lot earlier, just kind of exploring the idea of the cities. Like, I that there's one city that had the mafia, and I didn't realize that I was going to add a mafia into the city until there was a group of kids that wanted to make an item shop. And how are they going to have a building in the middle of a city in the poor district? Yeah, go talk to the mafia. They got it.
Yeah,
just
speaking of
buy
cities,
it.
one of the other things that can be very helpful is just, when you're doing your world, is to just name a couple major cities. You don't want every town in between Seattle and Portland, but, Seattle and Portland are good to have on a map, because you can fill in if they want to go adventuring to there, you can kind of go, oh, there's a stopover place
Yeah.
here, or the trade trail will lead you through these other smaller towns, or and you can start off or in a middle town, or some, the young shopkeep wants to go to Seattle one day, that kind of thing. These all become important to help you tell a story, and also like the more you can tie in those geographical places to like motivations for the NPCs or even player characters, that and having it not filled in, you can have the player characters go, well, I'm from a small fishing village. Then you can have that small fishing village exist, and you just put it on the map, or put it in your head, but you can also put it on a map if you have a map. But yeah, that I find incredibly important, is to keep like I said, keeping those areas open for interpretation, for what you need at the moment. Yeah, but like I said, having certain, you want to have the big mountain or a giant waterfall or something that you can have to in your back pocket, like, or if there's an ancient red dragon nearby, you're going to want to think, where is that dragon living, and maybe set it up so you can do that later. Obviously you don't want to do those first level characters aren't going to, they might hear the rumors of an ancient red dragon, but hopefully they aren't brave enough to take that on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the effect of a red dragon could be a very fascinating thing to sort of have. Every time we say it, all right. So like you could be in an area that has sort of these burned swaths and things, and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the effect of the dragon. There, you feel it all around.
yeah. And I think that can really help. So for me, a lot of times, the reason I like to set my campaigns and pre-existing adventures is if I'm not actively thinking about like what does the atmosphere feel like, I won't describe it, and then they end up sort of existing in a sort of white box that only has things in it that they're directly affecting. And I really like the idea of having a world where they feel like if they were to stop, turn to the left, and open a door, there'd be a scene inside that door. Whereas I feel like if I'm not playing from a campaign that I kind of a campaign setting that I kind of know, I feel like that if they were to stop, turn, open the door, they get a loading screen for a second, and then I just throw anything in there. Whereas like if you have a good solid sense of where you are, so like your city where there's like the two layers, that if someone is in that lower layer and they swing a door open, they're going to find one of a couple of things. They're going to find a poor person, someone getting shook down, somebody getting robbed. So whereas, if you don't have that kind of solid idea of where the players are, when they throw that door open, you're like, I don't know, there's a red dragon.
I do have this. I do have this very infamous character, not the Red Dragon, but you said Red Dragon, so I had to show her off. But I do actually have this character that was at first kind of a joke, but I'm kind of like, no, it's kind of funny to see like how every group interacts with this one. So he's this like super dirt poor homeless man, and it looks like he's seen a little too many death sticks in his life. But like he's just really run down. And he's like, hey, you want to buy a lemon? And like sometimes the characters are like, sure, I'll buy a lemon from you, being like heroic ones. And it's just this moldy, like old lemon. And
They're just like, cool. And then other times when I'm like, you want to buy a lemon? They're just like, no, go away. I don't want to go off for that way.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, no. I think having a sense of where you are can, I think, in many ways inform sort of the types of adventure that you'd run into. Jason, you have a lot of sort of pre-built worlds and countries and things. Do you find that you are sort of before you beginning your session that you've sort of fleshed out the city or the location, or is it more that depending on what type of adventure you want, you'll change the city to sort of meet that?
It's more the latter. I mean, I have a definite, like, I will try and push it into a certain area if it fits, like I want, I have some NPCs that are like, local to that. Like I have certain like thieves guilds and stuff, but they can have characters from that city come over. But for the most part, it's if I want to tell a scary story and they're going to, which Miros, which is, like I said, the magic oriented area, it's easy to, you kind of have to tell a little differently because there's going to be wizards to deal with a lot of that stuff, or or that kind of thing. But I'll do a little bit of I might come up with a whole new ghost hunting faction of wizards, that kind of thing. If I felt and that, or at least ones that wanted to make sure that ghosts didn't incur and hire the player characters or that kind of thing, or even it may not be ghosts. I mean, what kind of story I want to tell would the cities themselves tend to, in my mind, have a personality, and so they will incline themselves more to certain types of stories. I will kind of push the characters to go to the ones where the characters will tend to want to go to the places that will have the stories they want to play in. How about that?
So is it more that you've got like sort of the major cities are sort of your sort of more fleshed out sort of specific locations, and then kind of between the cities are your kind of blank canvas that you can sort of play around with.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's the whole feel I try and go for is just that my world building is very abstract. It's the I'm looking at themes that I want to touch on, and I try and make a place where that theme is more likely to occur. So that way, I mean, but like so I have a couple of adventures. They're both in the two different cities I mentioned: the Miros, the magical oriented one, and the other one in Kustos, which is the one with the undead on the other side. And they're actually dealing with the Underdark in that one, where there's an incursion of Drow coming up, kind of infiltrating the.
So your world does have the Underdark in it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. I have my volume down
Because
I was getting some weird feedback. What'd you say, Rob?
I was gonna say your world does have the Underdark in it.
Yes, it's mine, so there's a slightly different. I mean, I try to keep it as close to the standard fifth edition for the kids, but I have like it's got an underworld. In fact, it's much nastier in a way because there are no dwarves that exist in their strongholds anymore, except for the few crazy leftover holdouts. So like there's that kind of thing. But in the kids ones, they don't deal with that as much. I don't say it because if they want to play a dwarf that's from a stronghold, I mean, even then, like they're gonna be a weirder holdout that hasn't been enslaved by the other underground races. So.
Yeah, Jason's described his Underdark to me a little bit, and I'm just like, I don't want to go there. That's really creepy. I'm gonna go stay in Miro seems pretty. I'm gonna go there.
I like it. Now so you want to do like a ghost hunting adventure. You have this new sect of Miros that has these ghost hunter wizards. Now, is that something that gets sort of locked into the world? So now you will be able to return to that sort of location, or is that something that isn't necessarily set in stone in the world?
So, well, unfortunately, that's a bad example because I actually do have that in the world. So I actually have like, I mean, I'm the kind of person that when I my day-to-day activity, I'll be like, oh, I have a bunch of ideas for these like subgroups. So they're like wizards that do this other thing that they're not supposed to. So I'll like kind of write up a little thing like, what does a dragon hunting group really entail of in a D&D world? Like an actual D&D world, dragons are really frightening. They're incredibly powerful, incredibly smart. So either you have to be incredibly stupid or incredibly clever to be a dragon hunter and powerful. So and you'd want to is it just paladins? Is it just this? And so like I have things like that, but like I would I would be looking at when I would want to do the adventure. It probably would be something that I would want to shape into something I would want to keep. That's just, but I tend to do a lot more like when I'm preparing an adventure. At least I'm not gonna I will sit there and think about how does this impact the world, and so that's just the way I approach the stuff. So it's
Yeah.
I'm not as I fly by the seat of my pants because you have to deal with what players do, and players will always surprise you. That's all you can expect is you know, and even they'll surprise you by doing the thing you hope they would do, but you're like won't ever do this, and then like you're oh they did exactly what I thought they would do.
Yeah, like I have a group of players that they really do want to affect the world in the sense that they want to create a fortress or they want to create some sort of area, some sort of city. They've been to a couple of cities and they're like, okay, yeah, these kind of suck. We're gonna go build our own, which I'm kind of like, oh, sweet, that's awesome. That's great for world building. So they were trying to go find, or they were trying to find someone to make a fortress for them, or they were trying to figure out how to cast the Mighty Fortress spell, which is an 8th level spell that is very crazy. I didn't realize it's a square that's really big. And so they one thing led to another. They were able to they like literally just got a scroll, and then like 2 seconds later they're like, okay, we're gonna cast it right over here, right next to where we bought it. And I'm like, you know that there's like a shop right there, so like you might take it. So this is a kids group, and for a lot of times I actually use real life kind of fantasy twists. So this group was at a magical place that is very hard to get to, and it's called Fantasy eBay, where it is a bay in the shape of an E where they can go fish. It's for young kids, so I'm just like, you know what, that's totally fine. Fantasy eBay, that's the thing. Okay, so you're just literally fishing for merchants, cool. And they're like, we're gonna build a fortress right here, and you're like, you want to build it right on like a busy place where people go to, and they're like, yeah, why not? I'm like, cool.
Yeah. Well, I think that ultimately comes down to the big difference between playing a kids game versus an adult game, is the sort of consequences of actions have a different sort of weight. I feel like in an adult game versus a kids game, just because I think that's by nature of Coda, kids sort of learning how the world works, as well as this is like trying to discover that consequences of actions. But yeah,
Yeah, like those kid, yeah, like those kids that have a fortress. They were tasked by a blue dragon to go get somebody, so then that somebody could pay that blue dragon. They're just hanging out with that somebody in their fortress. So there might be some bounty hunters after them, or I mean, if the dragon gets tired, she might just be like, oh, fine, whatever.
So the good news is, because it's 120 feet by 120 feet, it does mention that it must not have any buildings or structures on it. So they can't, as long as you put like a shack in the space, you can kind of force them to be like 120 feet by 120 feet is pretty massive. So to have an open area that big, you definitely have to sort of wander away a little
I
bit.
accidentally gave them that open area, but that's totally
Okay.
fine. Also, if you look a little bit more into the details, it says that there's 100 invisible servants, and I'm just like, cool. Yeah, it's a pretty gnarly spell. It's from Xanathar's, and it's just like one of the kids was just looking through the book, and he's like, well, I want to find a wizard that can cast this spell, and I'm like, How about a scroll? Here you go. You bought it from Fantasy eBay. You actually stole it, but that's a long story.
You're muted, Jason.
I did a similar thing. I mean, I didn't cast the spell. I used the spell because the player characters are working for a god, and the god created a place for them in Elysium, so that they have a place to go when they're not doing things for the god. That's kind of a quantum leap scenario where they're jumping to fix wrongs that the god wants fixed. But in that case, like I looked at the servants and I wanted to kind of do something different. And so it's the same effect, but instead of unseen servants, they're paper people. They're literally two-dimensional paper beings that wander around and do all this stuff. And as they become friends with the characters, they develop facial features and stuff. And so like they are in love with that idea because like, and they could also, I also said that they could draw clothes and stuff on them. And so they sit there, come up with like, all right, this one's going to be wearing a tuxedo. So I'm going to sit there and pull out the crayons and it was totally something that was an improv. Like, I just want to make it a little more whimsical than just like unseen servants because they, just having. I mean, it's kind of cool to have stuff like flying off the shelves and cooking itself, and you can describe it like that. But
Classic
there was
fantasy.
paper people that they have absolutely, they have the paper family, and they've come up with the whole thing for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately it's going back to session 0 because let's build on our previous episodes. You can watch the VOD still. So I feel like in many ways what I find very fascinating is having your world building be sort of service the players and how they prefer to play. So like if you have a group that gets great joy out of doing things like making paper families out of your thing, then you can sort of adjust how you set it up. I think it can be a lot of fun. But if there's a group that's just like we want to go on wacky adventures and we don't really care about the world it's set in, then I think you can really sort of let your sort of mind go crazy and just be like, what sort of place do I need to be able to set this adventure in? Whereas if you have a group that's just like we like knowing about the world, then I think that can also be very helpful. So I think having your session 0 in many ways informs sort of how you're doing things, how you're doing your world can be a lot of fun. See, now I'm too quiet. Give me a sec. How am I sounding now?
Oh,
so check.
I mean,
baby,
you
check.
sounded fine on my end. To build up on the whole, to build up on the random, crazy wackadoodle adventures, just don't forget, you can always add something insanely weird. Like I have the ruins of the Bananaman Empire, where they are literally banana people. Because I found these miniatures online, and I'm like, I need to get these. And what do you know? They're an actual adventuring party of banana people. It is the most ridiculous thing, and so far the kids are just like, "Why are there bananas?" I'm like, "Cause why not?"
Yeah.
And a couple of them may have been cursed to look like a banana.
I feel like though, but again, going back to that, it's that kind of that idea of if having banana people services sort of the play style you're going for. So like if I think your setting can in many ways kind of inform sort of what things you can expect to see. If you're playing like a Curse of Strahd, Banana Men is not going to be a thing that you can just toss in there because it's so sort of incongruous with the rest of the sort of style and feel of the game. Whereas when you have that world that's a little bit more just like anything could happen, then yeah, Banana Men, throw them in. It's good stuff. But that's kind of
I've unfortunately turned the Banana Man into like some racist Banana Man. So like where they're like, oh, why do you want to be back into your regular form? You're a more superior being now. So if you want racist Banana Man, you gotta talk to me. I'll be able to help you out.
That is a sentence that you just said and came out of your mouth. Now I can't tell if Jason has. He's so stoic.
Oh yeah, no, I yeah.
Oh, you did freeze.
I'm freezing out, like looking. I'm messing with my turning my mute on and off since we are not normally in our. I'm not at home. Alex isn't at home. We're actually in the same downstairs, so we can kind of hear each other. So I have to be a little more.
That's why I have both of my headphones in.
Yeah, I'm muting. I forgot to grab mine. Like
your video has frozen, which is fascinating, but
yeah. So
That's
yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to fix something here.
No, you good.
No problem. I'm still here.
You're still here for thank you, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So world building, world building. What else? What other things should we talk about for world building? I feel like we've covered a lot of very interesting topics.
Yeah, so one of the other things, like when I was saying, like coming up with a big thing is also a good hook in the world. So like if like you got to think like you have like Lord of the Rings, where there's all the rings that were created for Sauron. That's all previous to the adventures of the Hobbit and all that stuff. But it's a fundamental aspect of the background of the world,
Yeah,
and the Mordor is a physical place, and so that's things like that. You take inspiration from it, but you can also like look at things like that. Or I know in oh gosh, it's in Pathfinder, but I've also used it. I've used aspects from Pathfinder because the background of the world is very fascinating. Galarian has some really interesting things in it, and I know I've totally lifted things from that for my own work because I just like them. So like in Galarian, there's a world wound where there's just this huge chasm that's been torn into the earth or the ground itself, and it goes down deep enough where it opens up to hell, and like things can come out and other weirdness. But that's you can have that kind of thing, like that's an equivalent of the Grand Canyon but scary, or
yeah,
or one of the other things I have, I've never had players go to it because I haven't really run it, is I have floating islands, a group of islands that are just floating over the ground itself. And there's weird flying creatures that tend to exist there, and little flying civilizations, and and like looking at just what you want to do, even if it's far in the future. Maybe eventually I want to set an adventure in my city of bronze, which is like where they don't use they use magic, but in service to technology. So they have like the jetpacks and flying around stuff. So it's a floating city, and it's kind of based off of 1001 Nights. So it's very Arabian, because I wanted to set it in that kind of and have a bit of like jinns and stuff in that area of the world. It's a weird thing, but just one of the ones I've worked on a bit just because I like, but I've never run anybody to it. I've had a character come from that place, which created a really interesting backstory, and they loved having that. But yeah.
Well, my character doesn't fly, but I want to go there. I want to make sure that I'm over there checking it out because it sounds super dope. It also sounds terrifying. Where if you fall, you're probably dead.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can fly. You have all the different animals and stuff that you'd use as steeds and such too. That would be a lot of fun. And
I went to
sphinxes
Pegasus.
and odd bits. Yeah. So that would, and some of it's just looking at some of the creatures and going, where are they originally from, or looking at like I said, mythology and stuff, and like, let's everybody have a Pegasus.
you
Yeah,
brought up
and
two.
also,
Oh, sorry.
oh, you go ahead.
So you brought up two great points there. Firstly, you mentioned the city of brass, and some other things, and what I steal from things. Don't like take it and call it your own. But so much of the things that you can do for your world is to have it based on things that people already know. So if you're sort of loosely basing things on the city of brass, on sort of things, I love to be able to say in Forgotten Realms, the Silver Marches. Imagine Montana. It's that. No, it is like the Waterdeep is either Seattle, Portland, and the Silver Marches are Montana. And then if you head into Canada, you're in Icewind Dale. Like. Actually, no, I think Baldur's Gate is Portland. Anyway, so yeah, like if you got your city of brass, if you have your things, like feel free to add that in there. It makes your life easier for making stuff up, and it also makes it feel familiar for people. And then,
Yeah.
Jason, you also mentioned.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say stealing ideas from like other pop culture stuff. When I described the city to my version of Miros to the kids, they were like, there's definitely like a generational gap, sort of, because like I was at first picturing like the city of Ba Sing Se from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then the kids were thinking of the city from Attack on Titan, and I'm just like, oh my god, you guys, there's such a difference. But then I was like, but there's there's a separation. And they're like, oh, or Ba Sing Se. And I'm like, yes, please, I want more Ba Sing Se. I don't want scary Titans around.
You're the DM. You get to decide what monsters are there.
I know, but still, like for them to be able to get a good picture of
Yeah.
what it is, I want them to think Bossing Say and creepy behind the scenes. Well, not Attack on Titan creepy behind the scenes, but like Bossing Say creepy behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Like for
Well,
kids their age, not Attack on Titan.
Yeah. Well, and the monsters thing I think was a really good point, and Jason brought it up where like having an idea of where you are set really helps with determining what sort of like encounters they'll have. So like if you're in a flying area, that can be sort of where where your more flying monsters are, and I think you can kind of come at it from the two directions of I want flying monsters, so I'm going to make a flying sort of set of islands, or I've got a set of flying islands. What sort of flying monsters would be in there? So I think you can kind of approach it both directions, where you can let the terrain inform sort of what things you'll see, or you have like a specific type of monsters you want to see, and let that inform the terrain. Because like a place that's largely overrun by undead and goblins, it will look wildly different from a place that is largely, a lot of like living plants and things.
And it's also hugely important if you have rangers in your party, because you need to think about what the environment is to have them shine or be struggling, whichever you want to do. Because yeah, if they took Arctic, or which very few players will, you're gonna want to like go more Icewind Dale than the desert. It's gonna or depending, you might want to throw that Arctic druid or archer into the desert just for that fish out of water thing. But yeah, it's a thing to consider. And also like having NPCs that are to that environment, because rangers and druids are great for that, especially when it's like the swamp. What's a swamp druid like? What's a ranger from the swamp like? You got to think of it's kind of fun to think of those things, and it kind of can put, here's my dwarf swamp ranger. It's just like
Florida.
I think Gully Dwarf from Dragonlance, if anybody knows what those are, that they're like the gross, stupid dwarf. I know that's an insult to people from swamp areas, but sometimes you got to be insulting.
Well, right, or just describe Florida.
Well, actually, going back to the Avatar thing, the difference between the northern and southern waterbenders versus the swamp waterbenders. Those are NPCs that are fundamentally they're all waterbenders, so like all rangers or dwarves, but the environment that they grew up in will in many ways sort of change how they're different. So I think when building your own custom world, think about what does what does a ranger look like here? What does a druid look like here? What kind of clerics do we have in this sort of region and area? I think Eberron has a delightfully fascinating thing where there's this giant plain full of halflings that ride dinosaurs, and that's great. If you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, dinosaurs ride halflings riding dinosaurs," that's a great image. Okay, so where would they be? Well, clearly they're riding through the plains, herding other dinosaurs and things. So yeah, you can again come at it from kind of the both directions of like I want to have this sort of grubby, mushroom-covered dwarf. Where would he be? Well, obviously either underground or in a swamp makes a lot of sense. Well, then now I need a swamp. So where's that swamp and what does it cover? And then how will it affect the adventure that we're doing since we have this sort of swampy dwarf? Yeah,
one of the other things to look at is like that we kind of stumbled into it, but like looking at the classes and how they affect the areas of the world. Like what is a paladin from that city like as opposed to this other city? What is the structure for religion? Like not just the gods, but what are how are they worshipped? Do they build temples? Maybe they don't. Maybe it's against certain things. Monks are another one. Like they need a place to practice their thing. Is it just a peaceful Zen garden at the top of a mountain, or
like a bunch of gyms that are like across the street from each other, and sometimes in the middle of the street they'll do their like my gym is better, and then they'll duke it out, and then all the people are like, oh, I'm gonna train with him.
Yeah, totally. I mean, to think of that, like the classes, the races, they'll be different in the different areas of the world. Hopefully, like I said, you go swamp, and you're like, well, what is a paladin from? Are there paladins in the swamp? Is there a monk monastery in the swamp? is yeah, is there a wizard's tower out there, and maybe they teach wizards in the swamp because nobody comes out there, or that's where you can do the mutations of creatures and be like, not an owl bear, we have the crocodile bear,
Oh,
the gator bear, because there's no laws to stop us out here.
y'all heard about the gator bears? Gator bears will get you. Coming at you with that looking around. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you can kind of and like looking at like so even just environment or like areas of your world to look at that and then see how D&D stuff can slot in there is kind of fun too, and that includes monsters. Like I said, like having owlbears, like in the new Icewind Dale, they have the snowy owlbear, which is a polar bear owlbear. You could easily do the same thing for like an Asian area, having a sun owlbear, the long tongue, and they eat, yeah, you can do unusual things. There's no reason to restrict yourself to just the player character stuff. You are the DM, and you can think of like how elementals are used in the swamp versus
even as a player, like you can allow this sort of the setting help inform how you're going to play your character. What could be really fun is to have like a character that I don't know. We keep going about the swamp because we get the swamp. So we've got our paladin from the swamp. But your paladin never wears heavy armor because you can't wear heavy armor in a swamp. You'll sink and drown. And like the spells that they might prepare in the beginning of their adventures is going to be different because they're swamping it up. So I think letting the world sort of inform how your character is being built can also be very fascinating as far as being a player goes.
Yeah, and I was going to add, in one of my groups, I actually have a paladin who he swears by swinging two weapons. And normally paladins, like, they're not really built for swinging two weapons at once. So I've actually kind of developed, don't tell him, but I've actually developed a little bit of some backstory from the city that he's from and the order of paladins he's from. They normally use one weapon in one hand, and they have a gauntlet that acts like a shield in the other hand so that they can catch the blades of the other. And so then, but he was the rebel who wanted to swing two swords. So he's on his own adventure, just running away. And don't tell him, but his dad's hunting for him. His dad's looking for him to ground him. Oh, you're muted, by the way.
That's a lie. I've never been muted in my life.
He's not muted. I was, but
yeah. No, that's going to be the mantra of 2020. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
So also, Jason, your face has been frozen in. It looks like we got a picture that we're gonna use this picture for Jason because his camera's not working. It's a top-notch picture, but you've been frozen.
I can do
for
that
a bit
for
now.
way too long. So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, another thing I highly recommend is Wikipedia diving. So like I said, looking up something like in different environments for animals and just kind of going through that can help a lot with just ideas of world building, like seeing like areas of the world, like what is you can even do like, let's have a fantasy version of Australia, where there's animals on this continent that you never saw before, even whole different breeding cycles. I mean, that's a big ask. I mean, marsupial dragons are just a strange, I mean, obviously or,
marsupial dragons sound amazing.
Yeah,
I love the idea of marsupial dragons.
Direct, like obviously, but I mean, same thing saying like a prison colony island is always fascinating. That's the idea that I have going in the adult campaign, which is that they're basically have crash landed in Australia, but a very recent, no longer a penal colony version. But yeah, you can do looking at things like history things and just seeing like, how can I kind of tweak this, put on its ear. When you watch a movie, go, hey, how could this be turned into even not the whole thing, but I want, how do they capture fear in this story, or how do they make a feeling of adventure when you're looking at just something that, how did they pace it is a great thing to look at when you're writing your adventures / writing world building. You look at like, like you said, the two gyms fighting each other. That's straight out of like numerous movies. Which ones exactly?
Kung fu movies.
Yeah, just
a lot of kung fu movies.
Yeah, but yeah, any movie you watch, I mean, like pretty much can be pulled back and you utilizing aspects, especially as a DM. It's harder as a player, because you have your one character, and you'll quickly become a zillion different things if you try and incorporate everything you watch into your character. But yeah, as a
Well,
DM, it's
I
one.
mean, seeing how your character interacts with new things, I think can be very fascinating. Because, like, you know, your character, again, we're going back to our swamp paladin. He spent his whole life in a very gooey sort of place. So the idea of people wearing full plate armor, like, that could be very interesting to have him try to utilize the difference in environment to his advantage, or to have him run into situations where the environment makes him have a harder time because of it. So that could be kind of interesting.
Another aspect is you can have like I said, like areas of the world. I know in in the Pathfinder world, they have a specific country that's almost run entirely by people that worship demons. And so if you were to transport a paladin there, how are they going to deal? Especially a typical paladin. I mean, you can easily have like a paladin of revenge that doesn't care or that kind of thing. But in general, that's going to be like a whoa, because having a entirely corrupt country that just like openly caters to demons to try and do stuff, that's going to put a challenge on clerics, and you know, that's another thing you're looking at world building, is trying to see things that would challenge those characters.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you run into somebody from there, what are you going to do? You know,
letting the environment be the antagonist.
Yeah, doing
almost.
an antithesis, you know, to player characters is also interesting.
I think in the Forgotten Realms, it's Thay. There's off on the far east, and the 5th edition books have really been largely vague on this. I think in Tales from the Yawning Portal, there is a Thay section, but it's in the far east of Forgotten Realms, the northeast section, and it's the Red Wizards of Thay is the whole thing, and they're, you know, very powerful, very sort of evil wizards, which can be interesting. But again, that's random old stuff. And I think that going back to the settings, the difference between having a published adventure versus having a your homebrew adventure, like knowing the existence of a place like Thay is a little bit more obscure. There's a lot more that you have to sort of pack into your noodle. Whereas, like, if you're homebrewing it, you just be like, oh, you know, like, wouldn't it be interesting to have this sort of demon worshipping country? Bam, it exists.
Yeah, and the other thing to look at with things like this is it gives history a reason to exist. A lot of times, because you can throw in like a random coin from this, you know, like it makes this. You found a platinum coin, but this platinum coin it has the face of a demon on one side and a queen on the other. Oh, it's from this place. And suddenly it's like there could either be a springboard. If they're interested, it's like, whoa, what is it? They make that history roll. You can tell them a little bit about it, and they could be interested in going there, or just avoiding, like, oh god, I never want to hear of this place, and then you're like, all right, that's coming to you. So it's 2:20 right now, Rob. We should probably try and end this at 2:30, since we are going to be moving stuff to the new location.
I still need to have lunch. Absolutely. The final thing I think that you kind of touched on that I think is a really great thing to sort of think about is, as a DM, your world can also be a tool that you can use to sort of, in the same way that an NPC can be your voice, so too can your environment be sort of that your voice, your ability to make things interact more interestingly. So as a DM, always keep in mind how your world can sort of propel your story, because yeah, you could have your evil country of demon worshippers that have sent out a group to find your group of players. So I think that's
Bananaman Empire.
Huh?
You could also have the Bananaman Empire, which are crazy bananas. Yeah,
exactly. So I think as a DM, one of the things you really have to be thinking about is the world is not just. It's not just a thing that exists around the players. Like the players are interacting with it, and, you know, that sets the tone in many ways for the style of things. Going back to Curse of Strahd, like if you're in Barovia, like it's a dark, creepy place. You know, that's kind of your tone for stuff, and then your NPCs in many ways will reflect that. And on the opposite side of that, remember that your NPCs reflect your world. So if you're wanting to sort of set this tone and set this style of world, make sure that your banana men continue to be happily bananas, as opposed to, like, you start your campaign, you're like, oh, they happen to be bananas, and then you continue along playing them as though they're just another random human NPC. Make sure that your world... Yeah.
These bananas are jerks. They are horrible.
And that's
They're
you're doing a good job
crazy.
keeping your world integrated into your NPCs. But yeah, so in the same way the world can inform the adventure in many ways can inform the world. They are linked as one. Yeah, I think that's do we have anything else that we felt we needed to say about world building?
Honestly, just like if you have some super creative characters or super creative players, like let them help you build the world.
100%.
It's gonna make your job easier. It's gonna make them feel extremely involved, and also it's just a ton of fun too. Where you're just like, yes, let's take your concept and make it canon.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
100%
absolutely.
agree with that one. And the other thing, like I said, is like don't be ashamed to steal. It's I mean, not necessarily steal, but like file off the edges. Of course, you do not want. Also, be wary when you do steal. When you create, the mercenary with the furry companion who they only communicate. One of them can't communicate in common, and the other one can. They're gonna instantly know that's Solo and Chewbacca. You're not fooling anybody. So you gotta the more obscure you go, typically the better. It's
but at the same time, if you have Solo and Chewbacca, you've got loads of expectations that are now thrown onto it. So then you can play around with those expectations.
100%, yeah. Because you could introduce that and then have those be the absolute villains, and that they're just pretending that's the game, because you know that they'll just go, they're a joke because that's Han Solo and Chewbacca.
Oh, that betrayal would hurt so much.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just main thing is just have fun. I think building a world, if you're of the inclination, even if you're not going to play in it for a long time, it's worth playing around with, keeping it in the back. Make little notes. Make your world, and eventually you'll get a chance to hopefully get to run it, or even like have a backstory for your character that can be slotted in.
You know what? Actually, that's an excellent point. So, ladies and gentlemen, adventurers out there in the world, assignment isn't the right word, but our quest, should you choose to accept it, is there's a town that exists. We need to either know for players. This is the town that your character is either from or going to. What does your character expect? How is their expectations going to be subverted? Will they be subverted? Who knows? What kind of things is your character likely to interact with? Or if it's from their hometown, what things do they like about it? What might people not know about it? Just come up with your character's town. And then for our DMs, come up with a town. Who's it run by? Who's it really run by? What sort of things would the players come to expect? What things won't they expect that might interact with them? Just come up with an idea, and we'd love to hear about it. When we hop on at the beginning of next session. Next session. Yeah, we're having the sessions here. On next Monday, I would love for you guys to tell us a little bit about the world in chat. Post it on Facebook. Post it in the Discord. We want to hear from you guys. You guys have a lot of fun ideas, and we're in this together. We're helping you out. Next week.
Also, as a quick aside, if you don't feel comfortable posting in like a public chat, you can also go ahead and just send us a message, or even send us an email. And typing out the email once again, it's Zulu's D&D at Gmail, just in case. But yeah, we've got a whole bunch of other ways for you to communicate with us if you don't feel comfortable with sending out your public assignments.
Sorry. Yeah, I just saw Alex just showed us we can apparently do exclamation mark website and exclamation mark Discord. So yeah, there's a link to the Discord. Join up, talk to us. It'll be great. Next week we're going to be talking about horror campaigns. Specifically, we're going to be looking into a little bit of the Curse of Strahd, which should be a lot of fun. Until then, stay safe out there, and we will see you about. Bye.
Bye, everyone.